At 33, I'm Elara Vance, and for 11 years I believed my family when they said Graham Eleanor's trust was almost empty. That lie shattered last spring when my mother called, crying, "Your sister needs surgery now. Please help." Sitting in my office, surrounded by ledgers, her words echoed my own desperate plea 11 years earlier, igniting something cold. I was 22, broke, in a leg brace, begging for funds they denied, while they secretly funneled my inheritance into Serena's lavish hotel grand opening. What had they really spent? A cedar box and an attic, forgotten bank statements, and a grand opening invitation revealed the truth in a matter of weeks. Every dollar of my surgery money paid for orchids, a celebrity chef, and a custom gown. My mother, meticulously arranging her anniversary dinner menu, had no idea the truth was about to be served. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. I'm Elara Vance, and at 33 I can read a betrayal the way other people read a clock in the numbers. Last spring my mother called me crying. She could barely get the words out. "Your sister needs surgery now. Please help." I sat in my office surrounded by historical ledgers and felt 11 years collapse into a single sentence because 11 years earlier those had been my words. I'd been 22, broke, locked in a rigid leg brace, begging my parents to release the money my grandmother left me so I could afford complex knee surgery. They said no. They said I'd manage. Then they spent $180,000 on my sister's lavish hotel grand opening. But here's what none of them counted on: the woman I'd become or the cedar box I'd find in my grandmother's attic. Before I tell you what I finally said back to my mother, you need to know what $180,000 really bought. If your family ever decided you were the strong one so they could hand your share to someone else, this story is for you. I run Vance Archival Forensics out of a quiet office in Portland, Oregon. 5 employees, 3 consultation rooms, 1 wall of filing cabinets that my assistant jokes could survive a direct hit from a tsunami. I audit historical societies, museums, private collections. When an endowment fund can't figure out where $1 million went, they call me. When a museum manager has been skimming acquisition fees for 6 years, I'm the one who finds the pattern. Numbers are honest. They don't perform for holidays. They don't pretend to love you at Thanksgiving and steal from you by January. That's something my grandmother taught me before I ever knew what a balance sheet was. Graham Eleanor used to sit me on her coastal home's floor in Astoria with a vintage nautical logbook older than my mother and walk me through columns of figures, pointing with a pencil that had no eraser. Numbers don't lie, Elara. People do. I was 7 the first time she said it. I believed her then, and I believe her now. The practice is mine. Built from nothing. No investors, no family money, no favors. I stand carefully when I stand up from my desk because 11 years ago, a surgeon fused a titanium plate into my knee, and the hardware reminds me on cold mornings. I move well. I move deliberately. I don't complain about it. That's a habit I picked up young, not complaining. Being the daughter who handled things, being the one nobody worried about 11 years ago, that quality almost cost me the ability to walk. But here's the thing about being the quiet one in a loud family. Eventually, you learn that silence has a compound interest nobody sees coming. Growing up, there were 2 Vance daughters. Serena was the eldest by 3 years. She had the cheekbones. She had the laugh that made waiters lean in. She had the closet full of dance recital trophies and the senior portrait that still hangs in my mother's hallway, backlit like a campaign poster. I had good grades. I had a used car I paid for myself at 16 with library aid money. I had Graham Eleanor. Our grandmother lived 20 minutes away in a weathered coastal home that smelled like sea salt and old parchment. While Serena was at cheer camp and my parents were orbiting her schedule, I'd ride my bike to Graham Eleanor's and sit cross-legged on the rug while she opened the cedar box. The box was dark, heavy, the size of a shoebox with a brass latch that clicked twice. Inside was the vintage nautical logbook, cracked spine, ruled pages, Graham Eleanor's careful handwriting in blue ink. She'd been a bookkeeper for a local cannery for 31 years, retired without fanfare. But those columns were gospel to her. She taught me debits and credits the way other grandmothers teach pie crust. When I was 12, Graham Eleanor opened an irrevocable college trust fund in my name. So no one could take it back, she explained. This is for your future. A college, a first apartment, whatever you need. She deposited birthday money, holiday checks, stock dividends from a small inheritance of her own. Year after year, the balance grew. She kept a record of every deposit in the logbook right next to my name. Then Graham Eleanor died, when I was 16. Heart attack on a Tuesday afternoon. I lost the person who saw me clearest. I didn't know yet that I'd also lose the money she'd saved. 6 years after Graham Eleanor passed, I was 22 and driving home from a late shift at the university archives in Corvallis, when a distracted driver on I-5 ran a red. The impact shattered my patella and tore my ACL. I remember the sound before the pain. A sickening crack like ice on a winter lake. Then the pain arrived and didn't leave. The ER doctor showed me the X-ray and pointed to a fragmented bone pressing into my joint. You need a complex reconstruction, he said. Sooner rather than later, or you're looking at permanent mobility issues. The estimate came back at $75,000. I had a high-deductible plan through the university, with a $15,000 deductible and a specialist network that didn't include the only knee surgeon within 60 miles who'd take my case. Out of pocket, best scenario, north of $60,000. I couldn't sit for more than 20 minutes. I couldn't stand straight. The clinic gave me a rigid leg brace, white plastic and Velcro straps that dug into my thigh every time I moved. I wore it under my clothes to job interviews. I wore it to Serena's birthday dinner. I wore it to sleep because lying flat without it felt like someone was driving a screwdriver into my kneecap. I had $5,800 in savings. I was 22 years old, and my knee was disintegrating. But there was money for this. Graham Eleanor's trust, the irrevocable college trust fund she'd built for years, the one she told me was mine. My parents were the trustees. All they had to do was sign the release. I called my mother, Elara Vance, on a Wednesday night and asked. My mother's voice went strange, the way it does when she's rearranging facts before she speaks. Honey, that account. There's almost nothing left. I shifted in my chair, and the brace creaked. What do you mean, almost nothing? Well, your educational expenses, and there were some adjustments. Graham Eleanor contributed into that account for years, she told me. Elara, your grandmother was generous, but she also wasn't keeping great records toward the end. Things got muddled. I'll look into it, but don't count on much. She changed the subject to Serena's new career opportunity. I sat there in the kitchen of my studio apartment with the phone wedged between my shoulder and my ear because I couldn't bend my neck, and I thought about the word adjustments. I'd worked in archives long enough to know that people who say adjustments without giving you a number are hiding the number. But I was in pain, real pain, the kind that narrows your vision to the next hour, the next position that hurts slightly less. I didn't push. I told myself she'd check and call back. She didn't call back. I called again the following week. She said she was still looking into it. The week after that, she said the bank was being difficult. The week after that, she didn't pick up. By then, the constant ache in my knee had spread to my hip, and the surgeon's office had called twice about scheduling. I was running out of time and out of viable cartilage. And then on the first weekend of May, Serena announced her engagement to Marcus Thorne. And my mother's attention shifted to the only project that had ever truly mattered to her. The grand opening planning for their new boutique hotel started the same week. Elara Vance, my mother, had been waiting for this her entire adult life. She grew up humble in a 2-bedroom rental in Salem with hand-me-down furniture and a father who was a long-haul truck driver. She married my dad, Robert, who ran a small construction outfit. They were comfortable, not wealthy, comfortable. But Evelyn had always looked at Serena and seen something shinier than what she'd been given. Serena was the corrective. Serena was the daughter who'd marry well, manage a successful venture, live the life Evelyn had cataloged in travel magazines since 1980. So when Serena got engaged, my mother didn't just plan a grand opening. She built a monument. The venue was a historic waterfront building in downtown Portland with floor-to-ceiling windows and a custom-commissioned glass art installation from a local artisan. The florist specialized in rare orchids flown in from Thailand. Serena's custom-designed gown for the ribbon cutting was bespoke. The caterer served a celebrity chef tasting menu for 200 VIPs. I know these details because my mother talked about them every time I saw her. Every time I called about the trust, every time I shifted in my brace and tried not to wince loud enough for her to hear. I was sleeping on the floor with my leg elevated by then because lying flat was no longer possible. The constant throbbing in my knee had spread to my hip. I'd started using crutches when no one was looking, and my mother was debating between antique Italian mosaic tiles and custom-etched glass panels for the hotel lobby. The numbers weren't complicated. 180,000 for a grand opening, 0 for a surgery. The math was simple, the message was simpler. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday in June. I hadn't been invited. They were doing menu tastings with the caterer, but I came anyway because my surgeon had moved my case to urgent and my left leg was buckling twice a day. I found my mother at the kitchen table with binder tabs organized by color. Ocean for the hotel's interior design, emerald for the landscaping, gold for the grand opening guest list. I sat across from her and said it plainly. Mom, I need the surgery. The doctor says if I wait past July, I could lose function in my leg. Graham Eleanor's trust has the money. I just need you to sign the release. She didn't look up from the binder. We've been over this. You told me you'd look into it. That was 2 months ago. Elara, the timing isn't. The timing is that my knee is collapsing. She closed the binder, looked at me, and her face had the expression I'd seen 1,000 times. The one where she's already decided, and the conversation is just a courtesy she's running out of patience for. Serena is opening her hotel in 4 months. Do you understand what that costs? Do you have any idea what we're managing right now? I'm asking about my account, the one Graham Eleanor left for me. Serena needs it more than you do. The room went quiet. My dad, Robert Vance, was in the doorway holding a glass of iced tea. He looked at the floor. I waited for him to say something. He took a sip and walked back toward the garage. My mother picked up the binder and opened it to a new tab. You're young, she said. You're smart. You'll manage. She went back to her guest list. I drove home in the brace. I stopped asking after that. Something closed in me. Not a door, more like a valve. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of them. I went back to my apartment and made a spreadsheet. I listed every payment I could defer, every side job I could pick up, every credit card with a promotional 0% rate. I took a second temp gig doing data entry for a historical society on weekends. I worked in the brace every day, standing at a desk I'd rigged with boxes, because sitting was a negotiation. And I kept losing. The grand opening was in September. I went. I wore a navy dress that hid the brace and took 3 ibuprofen before the ceremony. The hotel lobby looked like a page from the travel magazines my mother had been collecting since before I was born. Rare orchids in glass cylinders, custom lighting on every surface, a string quartet playing something I didn't recognize. 200 people eating seared scallops and laughing about how Evelyn had outdone herself. I stood in the back because the chairs were too low. I watched my sister cut the ribbon in a gown that cost more than my annual rent. I watched my father give a toast about investing in your children's happiness. I watched my mother beam in a way she had never once beamed at me. The photographer caught everything. That photo, the one of Serena and Marcus under the glass art installation with the orchids framing them like a crown, ended up in a silver frame on my mother's mantle. It's still there. 11 years later, it's still the first thing you see when you walk in. It took me 2 years to save enough for the surgery. It took me 11 to learn what they'd actually spent. I had the reconstruction at 24, a 4-hour procedure at a hospital in Seattle that accepted a payment plan I'd spend the next 5 years honoring. The surgeon put in a titanium plate and a synthetic graft between my patella and tibia. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the absence. The nerve fire that had been burning down my left leg for 2 years was gone. Just gone. Like someone had turned off a faucet I'd forgotten was running. Recovery took 4 months. I did physical therapy 3 times a week in a clinic that smelled like rubber bands and antiseptic. I learned to walk again, without the crutches. I learned to sit for an hour, without checking the clock. The brace went into a closet, then into a box, then into the back of the box. The scar runs 6 inches along my left knee, a pale line like a seam in fabric. I don't hide it. I don't show it off either. It's just there. The way the hardware is just there. The way the memory of the brace is just there on cold mornings when I stand up too fast and feel the plate settle. While I was recovering, I finished my archival forensic certification. I'd been studying between shifts, between pain flares, between the nights I sat with my leg elevated at 3 a.m. reading historical financial case studies because I couldn't sleep and needed to believe that numbers could fix something. They could. They can. I started picking up contract work auditing small historical societies, the ones with collections departments that ran on spreadsheets and trust. I was good at it. I was patient. I could sit with 1,000 lines of data and find the one that didn't belong. I kept my distance from my family not out of spite, out of math. By 27, I'd incorporated Vance archival forensics, 1 woman, 1 laptop, and a reputation for being thorough enough that institutions in 4 counties started calling before their grant audits. By 29, I'd hired my first employee. By 31, I had the quiet office, 3 analysts, and a client list that kept the lights on without me chasing invoices. I didn't talk about it at family dinners because I stopped going to family dinners. I sent birthday cards. I answered the phone when my dad called, which was about twice a year. Always brief, always the same script. How's work?
Fine.
How's mom?
Fine.
How's Serena?
Fine.
Nobody asked about the surgery. Nobody asked about the payment plan I just finished. Nobody asked about the scar. I was the daughter who managed, and managing was assumed to be effortless. The way people assume the lights come on, because that's what lights do. Graham Eleanor would have asked. Graham Eleanor would have opened the logbook and pointed to the column and said, "Show me the numbers, Elara. Show me what it cost." But Graham Eleanor was gone, and the cedar box was wherever my mother had stored the things she didn't find useful. I thought about it sometimes. The logbook, the trust records, the columns in blue ink. I thought about calling the bank and requesting statements. But the account was a trust. The trustees were my parents. And every time I'd tried to get information at 22, the bank had directed me back to them. I'd moved on. I'd built something. I told myself that was enough. If you're still paying off something a family member should have covered, I see you. I paid mine off 1 late night at a time. The next part is where the numbers start talking. Trust me, you'll want to hear what they say. Last March, my mother's voice broke through 11 years of careful distance like a brick through a window. "Elara, it's your sister." I was reviewing a provenance discrepancy for a rare manuscript collection in Salem. I put my pen down. "What about her?" "Marcus left." She said it the way you'd say a pipe burst. Sudden, expensive, someone else's fault. The details came in fragments over the next 2 calls. Marcus Thorne, Serena's husband of 11 years, had been running a real estate development business that turned out to be running on debt. When the debt called, Marcus didn't answer. He moved to a furnished apartment in Vancouver and filed for divorce, leaving Serena with a mortgaged hotel property, 2 maxed credit cards, a 10-year-old daughter named Chloe, and a herniated disc in her cervical spine that her soon-to-be ex-husband's soon-to-be canceled insurance would no longer cover. My mother delivered this like a verdict that required an immediate appeal. "She needs surgery, Elara. The doctor says the numbness in her hands is getting worse. She can't afford it. She can't even afford the consultation." I let the silence sit. My mother is not comfortable with silence. "Are you there?" "I'm here." "Well, I'm thinking." "What is there to think about?" "She's your sister." 3 days later, Aunt Beatrice called. Beatrice is my mother's younger sister, a retired social worker from Eugene who serves as the family's unofficial communications director. She told me the whole family was heartbroken. She told me Serena was barely functioning. She told me everyone was hoping I'd do the right thing. I thanked her for calling. I didn't commit to anything. I sat in my office and stared at the filing cabinets and thought about a cedar box I hadn't seen in 17 years. 2 weeks later, my mother called again. This time, the ask was different. We're selling Graham Eleanor's house. The weathered coastal home in Astoria had been sitting since my grandfather moved to assisted living 5 years ago. My parents had been paying the taxes, mowing the lawn, putting it off. Now they needed the money. There are boxes in the attic with your name on them. Old school things. Some of Graham Eleanor's stuff she wanted you to have. If you want any of it, come get it before the estate sale. I said I'd drive down Saturday. I told myself it was about the boxes, yearbooks, maybe the watercolor set Graham Eleanor gave me for my 10th birthday, maybe a few of her cooking things. I told myself I was going for closure for the last piece of a house that had been the safest place in my childhood. But somewhere under the telling, underneath the practical reasons and the clean logic, there was a question I'd been carrying for 11 years. A question shaped like a bank statement. How much had really been in that trust? I knew I could have fought harder at 22. I could have hired a lawyer, demanded records, pushed until something gave. But I'd been in a brace. I'd been in pain. I'd been 22 and broke and outnumbered by the people who were supposed to protect me. So, I'd let it go. I'd managed. And now my mother was offering me a reason to walk back into that house. The house where Graham Eleanor had kept her records. Where the cedar box had lived on the top shelf of the hall closet. Where the numbers waited in blue ink for someone who knew how to read them. I told myself I was just going for the boxes. I was right about the box, just not the one I expected. The house smelled like dust and dried lavender. Graham Eleanor had put them in every closet, and they'd outlasted her by 17 years. My mother was in the kitchen sorting dishes into keep and sell piles. My father was in the garage doing whatever my father does when my mother is in charge of something, staying out of range. Serena was in the living room. She was sitting on Graham Eleanor's old sofa, scrolling her phone, and she looked diminished in a way I hadn't expected, thinner. Her right hand rested on her neck in the careful way you hold something that hurts. She looked up when I walked in. Hey. Hey. That was the extent of our warmth. On the wall behind her, next to Graham Eleanor's landscape painting, hung the hotel grand opening photo, silver frame. Serena and Marcus, under the glass art installation, the imported orchids, framing them like a painting of people who'd never run out of luck. The orchids alone must have been $12,000. I knew because I'd audited a floral supplier the year before and learned what Thai imports cost when you need 200 stems in September. $12,000 in flowers. Gone in a night. Still on the wall. Serena caught me looking. You always did count things. Occupational hazard. She smiled, but it had an edge. Not everyone's built for the fairy tale, Elara. Some of us get it and lose it. You'll manage. You always do. She went back to her phone. There it was. My mother's phrase handed down like a family heirloom. The assumption that I was built for surviving, and she was built for being saved. I walked past her toward the stairs. The attic was one flight up and 17 years of Graham Eleanor's carefully labeled boxes were waiting in the dark. The attic was hot and low-ceiling, lit by a single bulb on a pull chain. Boxes everywhere, Christmas ornaments, old tax files, a sewing machine in a carrying case. In the far corner, behind a stack of maritime history journals, I found a box labeled, Elara, Graham Eleanor's things, in my mother's handwriting. Inside were the watercolors, a tin of buttons, Graham Eleanor's reading glasses in a quilted case, and at the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel printed with lighthouses, the cedar box. I knew it before I touched it. The brass latch clicked twice, same as it always had. I opened it in the heat of that attic and smelled cedar and old parchment and something that hit me so deep I had to sit on the floor. The vintage nautical logbook was inside. Cracked spine, blue ink. But underneath the logbook were documents I'd never seen. A college trust fund agreement. Irrevocable trust. State of Oregon. Beneficiary Elara and Vance. Trustees Evelyn Vance and Robert Vance. Opening balance, $6,000, and clipped to the agreement page after page in Graham Eleanor's handwriting every deposit she'd ever made. Birthdays, Christmases, quarterly dividends from her small inheritance, 7 years of entries. The last deposit made 4 months before she died brought the running total to $90,000. Below that total, In Graham Eleanor's steady hand, a single line. For Elara, numbers don't lie. I sat on the attic floor with a logbook in my lap and the heat pressing down on me, and the sound of my mother sorting dishes one floor below. And I felt something colder than anger. I felt math because 90,000 with even modest growth over the 6 years between Graham Eleanor's death and the day I'd asked for my surgery money should have been well over 110,000. My mother had told me there was almost nothing left. Numbers don't lie. People do. I took the cedar box home. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell anyone. I set the logbook and the trust agreement on my dining table and looked at them the way I look at a client file when something doesn't reconcile, with patience and with the knowledge that the answer is always in the records. The account number was on the agreement. The trustee names were on the agreement. And I was the beneficiary, the person to whom every dollar in that account legally belonged from the moment Graham Eleanor deposited it. At 22, I'd called the bank and been told the trustees would need to authorize any information release. I'd accepted that. I was young. I was in pain. I didn't know better. At 33, I knew better. I knew that as the named beneficiary of an irrevocable trust who had long since passed the age of majority, I had the legal right to a full accounting. I knew that a formal demand letter on my firm's letterhead citing Oregon's trust statutes and referencing the original trust agreement would carry weight that a 22-year-old in a leg brace never could. I drafted the letter on a Monday, sent it certified mail on a Tuesday, requested complete transaction records from the date of account opening to the date of final withdrawal, every deposit, every withdrawal, dates, amounts, authorizations. I copied a colleague who practiced fiduciary law because I wanted the bank to understand this wasn't a daughter asking. This was an archival forensics expert with standing and the original paperwork. The bank's first response came in 9 days. It was 1 page. They confirmed the account existed and had been closed. For detailed transaction history on an account closed over a decade ago, they'd need to retrieve archived records, and they'd need either trustee authorization or a court order. I'd expected that. My colleague sent a follow-up citing the Oregon trust statutes, my status as the named beneficiary past the age of majority, and a polite note that a subpoena would follow within 10 business days if the records weren't produced voluntarily. The bank's compliance department called 3 days later. The archived records would take 2 to 3 weeks to pull. I waited. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the ledger to balance. 5 weeks after my first letter, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. I opened it at my desk after my last employee left for the night, and the numbers started talking. The Irrevocable College Trust Fund had not been almost empty when I asked for my surgery money. It had held $118,500. Graham Eleanor's deposits plus 6 years of modest market growth on the balanced fund she'd chosen. $118,500. My mother had told me there was almost nothing left. She told me it went to my educational expenses. She told me the records were muddled. The records were not muddled. They were meticulous because banks are meticulous and numbers are meticulous. And the only thing muddled was the story my mother had built around them. The withdrawals started in March of the year Serena got engaged. 3 transactions in March, 2 in April, a large one in June, another in August. The last one, the one that emptied the account to zero, was dated September 3rd. Serena's hotel grand opening was September 7th. I spread the statements across my desk and stared at the dates. March through September. Engagement through grand opening. $118,500, withdrawn in 8 installments over 6 months by Elara Vance, trustee. I hadn't looked at bank statements in years without knowing exactly what I'd find. This was different. This was seeing your own name at the top of a ledger that someone had robbed while you were lying on the floor with a disintegrating knee. I opened Graham Eleanor's vintage nautical logbook and placed it next to the bank printout. Her deposits on the left, the withdrawals on the right, the handwriting on one side and the printer ink on the other, and between them, the entire architecture of a lie that had lasted 11 years. I closed the logbook. I didn't cry. Crying doesn't reconcile a balance. I picked up my phone and called a lawyer. The next morning, I pulled the vendor records for Serena's hotel grand opening. It didn't take long. The bank statements themselves did most of the work. Every withdrawal showed the pay line, the name on the check, or the wire recipient. All I needed was to match those names to the vendors. My mother had kept a binder, the same color-tabbed binder I'd watched her organize that Sunday afternoon, while I sat across the table in a leg brace, asking for my own money. I didn't have the binder, but I had the vendor names from the invitation suite that Serena had mailed to 200 VIPs, including me. The historic waterfront venue, the florist, the caterer. I still had the invitation in a drawer because I never had a reason to throw it away. I matched the March withdrawal payee. The waterfront venue deposit paid March 15th. The April withdrawal, the florist who specialized in imported orchids, first payment, April 10th. June, the celebrity chef caterer. August, the custom gown designer. September 1st, the glass art installation artist. I lined the pay names and dates up next to the trust withdrawal dates. They matched. Not approximately, exactly. Every single disbursement from my irrevocable college trust fund mapped dollar for dollar, week for week to a grand opening expense. My surgery money paid for the orchids. My surgery money paid for the glass art installation. My surgery money paid for the celebrity chef tasting menu and the antique Italian mosaic tiles and the string quartet and the silver frame that still hangs on my mother's wall. Graham Eleanor saved for 7 years, so I'd have a future. My mother spent it in 6 months, so Serena could have a weekend. Numbers don't lie. They don't editorialize. They don't console you or explain why. They just sit there row after row, quiet and irrefutable, and let you decide what to do with the truth. I decided. The attorney's name was Mr. Harrison. He practiced fiduciary and estate law out of an office in downtown Portland with a view of a brick wall and a filing system that rivaled mine. I brought the cedar box, the bank statements with the pay lines annotated, the grand opening invitation, and the trust agreement. I laid them on his desk in order. The gift, the growth, the theft, and the proof. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. This is clean. Under Oregon law, an irrevocable college trust fund is an irrevocable gift. The money belonged to you from the moment Graham Eleanor deposited it. Your parents, as trustees, had a fiduciary duty to manage those funds solely for your benefit. Education, medical expenses, the things a careful trustee would authorize. Spending it on another child's hotel grand opening was not on that list. It was a textbook breach of fiduciary duty. It was conversion, the legal term for taking someone's property and using it as your own. Mr. Harrison outlined the path, a formal demand for repayment. If refused, a civil complaint for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and an accounting. He was candid about the range of outcomes. A judge might award the principal only, or the principal plus statutory interest, or, in the best case, the amount the funds would have reasonably grown to had they remained invested. Nothing was guaranteed at trial, but Mr. Harrison had handled enough fiduciary cases to know the math itself was leverage. Trustees caught with this kind of paper trail almost always settled because the alternative was a courtroom where a judge would read Graham Eleanor's handwriting out loud. He ran the numbers on the strongest scenario, 118,500 invested in a standard index fund over 11 years at historical average returns. The figure came back at approximately 180,000. I looked at it on his yellow legal pad and almost laughed. 180,000. The same number my mother had spent on the grand opening. The math was so symmetrical it felt designed, but it wasn't. It was just math. Numbers don't negotiate. They don't forgive and they don't forget. I told Mr. Harrison to prepare the demand letter. He said he'd have it ready by Friday. I drove home from Mr. Harrison's office and sat in my driveway for a long time. The engine was off. The neighborhood was quiet. A woman across the street was watering her garden and waving at a mail carrier. Normal Tuesday. I just set in motion a lawsuit against my own parents. That's not a normal Tuesday. I want to be clear about something. I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired. I felt the specific tiredness of a person who has been managing for 11 years and has just discovered that managing was never a personality trait. It was a sentence handed down by people who found it convenient. I thought about my mother's face at the kitchen table, the binder tabs, the way she didn't look up. You'll manage. It had never been a compliment. It was a budget allocation. I was the line item that got cut, so the other line item could have orchids. The question isn't whether I felt guilty. I didn't. Guilt was what they'd handed me for free for years. Guilt for needing. Guilt for asking. Guilt for existing with a body that required repair, while my sister's ambition required a party. What I felt in that driveway was clarity. The kind that comes when you stop being the easy one and start being the accurate one. People keep asking if I felt guilty. I didn't. Guilt is what they handed me for free for years. If anyone ever taught you that asking for your fair share makes you the villain, stay with me. The receipts are about to do the talking. I went inside. I poured a glass of water. I opened the cedar box one more time, ran my finger along Graham Eleanor's handwriting, and closed it. Friday was 3 days away. Friday came. The demand letter went out, and before the postal service could deliver it, my mother called to invite me to a celebration. Not a regular celebration, a family gathering, the kind with aunts and uncles and cousins, the kind my mother orchestrates when she needs an audience. We're getting everyone together Sunday for Serena. She's been through so much, and the family wants to show support. And it's Robert and my 40th anniversary, a small gathering, nothing formal. I knew exactly what this was. I'd seen my mother run this play before. The gathering designed to look like warmth but function like a tribunal. Everyone would be briefed. Everyone would know that Elara had the means, and Serena needed help. The meal would be served. The small talk would wind down. And then my mother or Aunt Beatrice would make the ask publicly, with 14 sets of eyes watching me to see whether I'd be a good sister or a selfish one. I said I'd come. My mother sounded relieved. Bring a dessert? Your father loves that lemon tart. Sure. I hung up and imagined the table. My parents at the heads. Serena looking fragile. Beatrice looking righteous. Uncle Arthur and Aunt Pat from Bend. Cousin Chloe with her husband. Maybe Great Aunt Martha, who always sides with whoever cries first. 14 people arranged to apply maximum pressure on the one person in the room who understood what 180,000 actually represented. They thought I was coming to say yes. They thought the daughter who managed would manage one more thing. Write a check, absorb the cost, confirm her role as the family's financial utility. They didn't know about the bank records. They didn't know about the demand letter already in transit. They didn't know I was bringing the cedar box. Saturday afternoon, I drove to Serena's apartment, a rental in Vancouver that smelled like carpet cleaner and stress. I didn't call ahead. I knocked. Chloe answered. She was 10, tall for her age with Serena's cheekbones and none of Serena's practiced composure. She looked startled to see me. We didn't have that kind of relationship. I was the aunt who sent birthday checks and showed up at Christmas with a book. Hey, Aunt Elara. Hey, Chloe. Is your mom home? Serena was lying on the couch with an ice pack on her neck. She sat up too fast and winced. For a second, she looked exactly like me at 22. Careful, hurting, trying to pretend she wasn't. I didn't feel sympathy so much as recognition. Pain looks the same on everyone. It doesn't care about fairness. I told Serena I'd come by to see how Chloe was doing with the transition. That was true. I sat with Chloe at the kitchen table for 20 minutes while Serena rested. Chloe told me about her science project, a study on bridge load-bearing. She liked math. I didn't tell Chloe about the lawsuit. I didn't tell her about the trust. I told her that whatever happened between the adults in our family, she wasn't part of it and never would be. You're not part of this, sweetheart. You never were. She nodded like she understood more than a 10-year-old should have to. I left Serena's apartment and sat in my car and made a quiet promise to myself that no matter what happened at that dinner table tomorrow, no matter what came out of the demand letter or the lawsuit or the reckoning, Chloe would be protected. The cycle stops when someone decides it stops. Saturday night, 11 p.m. My phone lit up. Mom. I picked up because if I didn't, she'd call 7 more times. I just wanted to make sure you're coming tomorrow. For our anniversary. I said I'd come. Good. Because your sister, Elara, you have no idea what she's going through. The bills, the hotel. Marcus just vanished. She's alone with Chloe and her neck is. I know. Then you understand why we need to come together as a family. This is what family does, Elara. After everything we gave you. After everything we gave you. I held the phone against my ear and let that phrase sit in the air between us. Let it ring against 11 years of what she'd actually given me. A lie about an empty trust, a brace I wore to a grand opening I paid for with my own knee, and a sentence you'll manage that she'd packaged as confidence and meant as dismissal. I'll be there at 5. I'll bring the lemon tart. The 1 gram Eleanor used to make. She said it without irony. She wanted me to bring Graham Eleanor's recipe to a dinner designed to spend Graham Eleanor's money a second time. I made the lemon tart. I used Graham Eleanor's recipe card, the one with flour smudges and a grease stain in the corner from 1993. I baked it in Graham Eleanor's dish. And while it cooled on the counter, I packed the cedar box into my bag, the vintage nautical logbook, the trust agreement, and a copy of the bank statements printed on my firm's letterhead, annotated in my own handwriting with a red pen. Each withdrawal date circled, each corresponding grand opening invoice date noted in the margin. I didn't rehearse the speech. Numbers don't need rehearsal. They just need someone willing to read them out loud. Sunday, 5 p.m., my parents' house. The driveway was full. Uncle Arthur's SUV, Aunt Beatrice's sedan, Cousin Chloe's minivan. I parked on the street. I carried the lemon tart in one hand and my bag, the one with the cedar box, in the other. I stood on the porch for a moment and listened. Laughter inside, the clink of ice and glasses. My mother's voice higher than usual, directing someone to move the extra chairs. Through the front window, I could see the dining room table extended with 2 leaves, 14 place settings, the good china, the kind that only comes out when my mother wants to stage something. I walked in. There she is. Aunt Beatrice, arms wide, perfume that preceded her by 3 feet. She hugged me like I'd just returned from a long journey. Uncle Arthur shook my hand. Cousin Chloe squeezed my arm with a look that said she'd been briefed and was already on Team Serena. My father was in the kitchen doorway holding a beer. He gave me a nod that contained absolutely nothing. Serena was seated at the table already, neck brace visible above her collar, a soft brace, not the rigid kind I'd worn, but visible. Staged or genuine, it was there. My mother emerged from the kitchen with serving platters. She saw the lemon tart first. Oh, you made Graham Eleanor's. Then she saw me set my bag down on the chair next to mine, and something crossed her face. A flicker too fast to name, like seeing someone bring a briefcase to a birthday party. On the wall behind the table, the grand opening photo, silver frame, orchids like a crown, 180,000 of frozen happiness. I sat down. The cedar box waited at my feet. Dinner was roast chicken. My mother carved. The conversation circled Serena the way water circles a drain. Every topic bent toward her. How hard the divorce had been. How brave she was with Chloe. How the hotel property was underwater. How the surgery couldn't wait. Beatrice steered it.
She was good at this.
The casual aside, the meaningful pause, the I just think families should be there for each other, deployed like a conversation grenade. By the time my mother brought out the lemon tart, the table had been sufficiently primed. Beatrice put her fork down. Elara, we all know why we're really here. The room went still. 14 pairs of eyes. My father studied his plate. Your sister needs surgery, the kind you of all people understand. That was a nice touch, invoking my own experience as leverage. The consultation alone is $4,000. The procedure, if she can even find a surgeon who will take payments. She trailed off and looked at Serena. Serena looked at me. Her eyes were damp. Whether that was pain or performance, I genuinely don't know. Elara, my mother said. She used her serious voice. The one from parent-teacher conferences. The one that means this is the part where you agree. Your sister needs surgery now. Please help. The exact words from the phone call. The exact intonation. Probably rehearsed around the table. I could feel the weight of expectation settling. Arthur was nodding. Chloe had her hands folded like she was in church. Great Aunt Martha was already reaching for a tissue. My mother waited. Serena waited. Beatrice waited. They all waited for the daughter, who manages to manage one more thing. I reached down and picked up the bag from beside my chair. I set the cedar box on the table next to my plate. The brass latch clicked twice. My mother's expression shifted. She recognized it. Graham Eleanor's box. The one from the hall closet. The one she'd apparently thought was buried in the attic forever. "What is that?" Beatrice asked. I opened the box and removed the vintage nautical logbook. I placed it on the table, opened to the last page of entries, Graham Eleanor's careful blue handwriting, 7 years of deposits, the running total of 90,000, and the line at the bottom, "For Elara, numbers don't lie." Then I removed the trust agreement. I placed it next to the logbook. "This is the irrevocable college trust fund Graham Eleanor opened for me. Under Oregon law, every dollar in this account legally belonged to me. Mom and Dad were the trustees." The room was quiet. My father set down his beer. "Elara," my mother started. I removed the bank statements, 8 pages printed on my firm's letterhead. I placed them next to the agreement. "When I was 22 and needed complex knee surgery, I asked you to release these funds. You told me the account was nearly empty. You told me it went to my educational expenses." I pointed to the statements. The account held $118,500 on the day I asked. It was emptied over 6 months. I placed the grand opening invitation next to the bank records. The same invitation Serena had mailed to 200 VIPs. Every withdrawal shows a pay line. The waterfront venue, the florist, the caterer, the custom gown designer. Every vendor name on this invitation matches a payee on these bank statements. The withdrawal dates match the payment dates. My irrevocable college trust fund, the one Graham Eleanor saved for 7 years, paid for this grand opening. I looked at the photo on the wall, the orchids, the glass art installation, the silver frame. Then I looked at my mother. "Serena needs it more than you do." Her own words returned with documentation. The room didn't breathe. Aunt Beatrice was the first to speak. "Now hold on. I'm sure there's an explanation." "There is," I said. "The explanation is breach of fiduciary duty and conversion. Those are the legal terms for what happens when a trustee spends a beneficiary's irrevocable funds on someone else's hotel grand opening." I kept my voice level. This was an audit presentation, not an argument. "I've retained an attorney. A formal demand for repayment was mailed to this address on Friday. Under Oregon trust statutes, we believe I'm entitled to recover the principal plus the growth those funds would have earned had they remained invested. And trustees with this kind of paper trail almost always settle." I let that sit for a moment. The attorney's estimate based on standard index fund returns over 11 years comes to approximately $180,000. Uncle Arthur leaned back in his chair. Chloe put her hand over her mouth. Great Aunt Martha lowered her tissue. 180,000, the same number this family had celebrated. The same number that hung in a silver frame on the wall. The same number that had bought orchids and seared scallops and a string quartet while I slept on the floor because I couldn't lie flat. Now it was just a debt. "That money belongs to me," I said. "It always did. Graham Eleanor deposited it. Graham Eleanor documented it. The bank recorded it. And my parents spent it. Not on my education, not on my medical, not on anything the law authorizes a trustee to spend it on. They spent it on a party." I looked at my father. He was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. I looked at Serena. She was staring at the bank statements like she'd never seen her own grand opening itemized. I looked at my mother. She hadn't moved. Then she moved. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor and tilted against the wall. "How dare you?" Her voice cracked on the second word. "How dare you sit at this table in this house and accuse me?" "I'm not accusing you. The bank statements are accusing you. I'm just presenting them. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you." I kept my hands flat on the table. "Steady." Graham Eleanor wrote for Elara, "Numbers don't lie." I think she knew exactly who she'd be ashamed of. My mother's face collapsed into a different shape. Not grief, not remorse, something closer to exposure. She started crying, but it was the crying I'd seen her do at retail counters and insurance offices. The kind designed to shift the room's sympathy back to her. I did what I had to do for this family. Your grandmother left that money for the family, not just for you. It was an irrevocable trust. My name, my funds. That's not an interpretation. It's a statute. You always had to be so smart, didn't you? So righteous. Serena stood up. Are you serious right now? I'm sitting here with a broken neck, and you're suing Mom over money? You're punishing me. I'm not punishing you. I'm recovering what's mine. Beatrice jumped in with something about family and forgiveness, and how money isn't everything. And I let her finish because she wasn't saying anything that changed a number. Then my father spoke. He hadn't looked up since I placed the bank records on the table. I should have said something. The room went quiet again. He stared at his hands. I knew I should have told you.
He paused then.
But Elara, can't you just let this go for the family? It's our anniversary. I studied his face for a long time. The same face from that Sunday in June 11 years ago, holding the iced tea, looking at the floor, walking toward the garage. My mother wiped her eyes. She steadied herself on the back of the chair. She took a breath that I could hear from across the table. Then she played the only card she had left. But your sister needs surgery now. Same words, same cadence, same appeal, spoken to a room full of people who now understood for the first time what those words had cost me the last time she said them. I looked at Serena, at the soft brace on her neck, at the invoice for orchids sitting 2 inches from her water glass. I looked at my mother, at the woman who'd told me to manage while she spent my future on someone else's weekend. I looked at the grand opening photo on the wall, the glass art installation, the silver frame, the 200 VIPs and the imported flowers and the celebrity chef meal and the custom gown. All paid for with money my grandmother had saved, one deposit at a time, in a vintage nautical logbook with a cracked spine. I felt the plate in my knee. I felt 11 years of managing. I looked my mother in the eye and I said it the way she'd said it to me, even practical, without cruelty, as if I were simply describing how the world works. She'll manage. I left that night before the lemon tart was finished. Nobody followed me to the car. The lawsuit settled 3 months later. My parents' attorney advised them to avoid court. The documentation was too complete, the breach too clear. The settlement returned $175,000 plus attorney's fees. Not the full $180,000, but close enough that the math felt honest. My parents refinanced the hotel property to pay it.
I don't take satisfaction in that.
I take accuracy. Serena found a surgeon who accepted a payment plan through a hospital assistance program. She had the procedure in August and was back on her feet by Thanksgiving. She managed. She managed the way I managed, slowly, painfully, with nobody writing a check to make it easier. The difference is that nobody stole from her to fund someone else's comfort. She just had to do it the hard way like I did. The money that came back to me went 3 places. I put a portion into an irrevocable college trust fund in Chloe's name, her name with myself as trustee, and a letter attached explaining exactly what the account is, exactly how much is in it, and exactly when it becomes hers. I donated a portion to a hospital fund that covers surgical costs for uninsured patients in Central Oregon, and the rest went back into my practice because the practice is mine, and everything it is I built while sleeping on the floor with my leg elevated. My father calls about twice a year. The conversations are shorter now. My mother doesn't call. Serena sent a text in December. No request, no demand, just 2 sentences. I didn't know where the money came from.
I'm sorry.
I haven't replied yet. I'm still deciding what that's worth. I visit Chloe once a month. We sit at her kitchen table, and she shows me her homework, mostly math, which she's good at. I don't coach her. I just check her work and let her explain her thinking. Last week, she asked me if I was mad at her mom. I told her the truth. I'm not mad. I'm clear. There's a difference. Anger runs out. Clarity compounds. I stood up from her table and felt the plate settle in my knee the way it always does. A small shift. A quiet reminder. The scar is pale now. The brace is in a landfill somewhere. The cedar box is on my desk at the office next to the monitor, where I can see it while I work. I open it sometimes, not for the documents. Those are filed. But for the logbook, for Graham Eleanor's handwriting, for the steady blue ink that says the same thing on every page. I was here. I counted. And what I counted for you. Math can expose the truth. Every withdrawal, every lie, every dollar rerouted from the person who needed it to the person who was preferred. But peace doesn't come from the balance sheet. It comes from the day you stop spending your heart on people who were never going to pay you back and start investing it in the ones who show up with their own receipts. That's my story. 11 years, 1 cedar box, and a balance that finally came due. The grand opening of the newly expanded Vance Hospitality flagship hotel was set for early spring. My parents, Evelyn and Robert, had decided to combine it with a belated celebration of their 40th wedding anniversary, a double event designed to maximize publicity and project an image of enduring success. Invitations, embossed with a stylized VH logo, had arrived weeks ago at my office. I'd filed mine, a stark reminder of the original grand opening invitation that had proved so instrumental. The hotel, now boasting an additional wing and a rooftop bar, was the culmination of my mother's lifelong ambition. She'd curated every detail, from the locally sourced art in the new suites to the custom uniforms for the staff. It was a monument to their perceived prosperity, a facade built on the foundation of my stolen future. My father, as always, remained in the background, a silent partner in my mother's grand designs, his role reduced to a genial presence at public events. I hadn't seen them since the anniversary dinner, the night I'd laid bare their deception. Communication had been minimal, primarily through Mr. Harrison, my attorney, regarding the settlement payments. The silence from my mother was absolute. My father's infrequent calls were strained, filled with awkward pauses and surface-level inquiries about my work, never venturing into the chasm between us. Serena's text, "I didn't know where the money came from. I'm sorry," still sat unanswered in my phone. It was a half-truth, a partial acknowledgement that offered little in the way of true remorse or understanding.
I was still deciding if it was worth a reply.
Chloe, however, remained a bright spot. Our monthly visits were a refuge from the family's tangled history. She thrived on logic and numbers, a trait she'd inherited from Graham Eleanor, bypassing the emotional complexities that ensnared the rest of us. Her questions were direct, her curiosity genuine. I found a quiet satisfaction in nurturing her intellect, in providing a safe space where truth was valued. The irrevocable college trust fund I'd established in her name was a tangible expression of this commitment, a silent promise that her future would not be compromised by the past. The day of the grand opening arrived, crisp and bright, a typical Portland spring morning. The city was abuzz with anticipation. Local news channels had been running segments on the Vance hospitality expansion for weeks. I drove past the hotel on my way to work, a towering structure of glass and steel reflecting the morning sun. It looked impressive, a testament to architectural ambition and financial prowess. To the casual observer, it was a triumph. To me, it was a monument to a different kind of calculation. My office, in contrast, was a haven of quiet industry. The hum of computers, the rustle of old papers, the focused murmur of my team. It was here, surrounded by the tangible evidence of histories both grand and mundane, that I found my purpose. Every audit, every solved discrepancy, reinforced my belief in the power of objective truth. Numbers, unlike people, held no grudges, spun no tales, sought no sympathy. They simply were. Later that afternoon, as the grand opening festivities were in full swing, I received an email from Mr. Harrison. It was a brief update regarding the final payment from my parents. The refinancing of the hotel property had gone through, and the last installment of the settlement, including attorney's fees, had been deposited into my account. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the cedar box on my desk. It was a simple, unassuming object, yet it contained the weight of generations, the legacy of a grandmother's love, and the undeniable proof of a family's betrayal. I opened it, not to retrieve documents, but to touch the worn leather of Graham Eleanor's logbook. Her blue ink, faded but clear, spoke of diligence, foresight, and an unwavering commitment to honesty. The grand opening was a success, according to the news reports I saw later that evening. Champagne flowed, Dignitaries offered congratulations, and my parents beamed for the cameras, epitomizing the vision of a successful family enterprise. Serena, looking radiant, stood by their side, her neck brace presumably long gone, a testament to her own recovery. They had managed, just as I had. But their management came at a cost, a debt that went beyond the financial. It was a debt of trust, of familial duty, of emotional integrity. A debt that, unlike the money they had to pay back, could not be refinanced. As I closed the cedar box, the brass latch clicking twice, I knew that some ledgers, some accounts, could never truly be balanced. The numbers might be accurate, the money repaid, but the deeper truth, the understanding of what had been lost, remained. And that, I realized, was a clarity that compounded long after the anger had run out. Lessons from this story. Trust can be irrevocably broken by those closest to you. Self-reliance and hard work can empower you to overcome adversity. Objective evidence, like financial records, can expose deep-seated lies. Breaking cycles of family manipulation is essential for personal peace and future generations.